All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to be covering Agent Client Collector from deployment to achieving outcomes. And this is the first in a series of ITOM Visibility and Governance community webinars that we're going to be hosting. We're going to do it the third Tuesday of every month at this same time, so please be sure to join us for future topics. So my name is Steve Emerson, and I'm the Outbound Product Manager for ITOM Visibility here at ServiceNow, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. And as an Outbound PM, I wear many hats: product evangelism, customer value realization, and sales enablement, just to name a few. But what I love most about my role is that I get to meet with you guys and hear how you're using our products, and I get to share information about how our products can help you solve your business challenges. So I've been with ServiceNow for almost 5 years, and I've been working with the platform for 9 years as a customer, as a partner, and now an employee. But I have spent most of my career in enterprise IT roles, just like yourselves, and I did that across a multitude of functions, right? So I've been in your shoes. And our main presenter for today is Severin. So Severin, can you please just give you a brief introduction?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Severin. I am the product manager for the Agent Client Collector on the inbound. So I drive the product roadmap for ACC, and I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you very much, Steve, and everyone on the call.
Thanks, Severin. So before we get started with our topic here today, I just want to do a quick poll. I'm going to launch a poll here. So what is your experience with Agent Client Collector? Please answer the question here. So, what is ACC? Or are you performing a proof of concept right now? Are you undergoing an architecture review board or security review? And are you using it in production? We'd love to know that. So let's give it a few more seconds. I still see answers rolling in. Thank you. Thank you guys for your participation here today. All right, looks like we've stopped getting answers, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So what we see here is a lot of you are not aware of what ACC is, and today, obviously, you will get to learn more about it. And then some of you are performing a POC. Some of you are actually undergoing a ARB or security review, and we have very few of you who are using it in production so far today. Thank you guys for doing that. We'll have one more poll that we're going to go through here in just a few moments. So what is ACC, right? ACC is our single agent that can be used for workflow automation across technology workflows directly on your endpoints. And when I say endpoints, I mean your servers, your workstations, your end user computing devices. Right? So of course it can be used for push-based discovery, which is useful in many scenarios, right? So things like end user computing, where if I go to discover my computer but it's not running, well, hey, you're not going to find it online, right? The agent will actually push its configuration back to ServiceNow when it comes back online. IPv6 enabled computing, which today we have support for IPv6 on our agent, and challenges what obtaining credentials, right? So the agent that we have is credential-less. We don't need to go out and get admin credentials to push data back to our ServiceNow instance. And there's a few other scenarios like air-gapped networks, which we may touch on here today as well. So beyond our push-based discovery, of course, ACC drives value across many different technology workflows. So when it comes to IT service management, we have our live CI view application that can really help speed the resolution by viewing those real-time system information that does not require a remote desktop connection, right? So remediation playbooks, we can reduce human intervention by automatically allowing resolving common endpoint application issues. For example, we have one with Zscaler today. And virtual agent conversations are the ability to have a user request something using a virtual agent, and if ACC is installed on the computer, essentially be able to execute the deployment of software or the deployment of remote, of admin access, for example. With security operations, we can help you reduce risk, as well as drive that that lower mean time to recover by allowing access to real-time system information from the agents themselves. And of course, with AI Ops, that is our monitoring and health log analytics solution. So we can use the agent to stream events, metrics, and logs back to ServiceNow, and then do the correlation, of course, with with our AI Ops solution. And then as far as software asset management goes, right, we can help you optimize your software spend by providing that software visibility and usage data, whether it be through last use date or metering, which we now have capabilities for. So with that said, I'm going to also let you know that our ACC is delivered via the ServiceNow store. As you know, we have 2 family releases every year, but we do release quarterly via the ServiceNow store for most of the ITOM solutions. So Agent Client Collector, you see a screenshot here. If you go to store.servicenow.com, you will see where to find these applications that you're going to learn more about today. And I forgot to mention earlier, if you guys do have any questions, please use the Q&A panel. We will be looking at that today. So please feel free to ask questions throughout. And if there's anything that is pressing, we will stop the session and we will ask it live. And then here's just a bunch of the features that we have released recently through each of the ACC apps. I'm not going to go through all these here today, but as you can see, here's what you're missing out on if you're not using Agent Client Collector. And then finally, we'll do one more poll before I turn it over to Severin. We'll go ahead and launch our second poll around our ACC use cases. So of the ones I just described, right, which of the use cases do you see adding the most value to your organization? And this is a multiple choice question here, so please select as many as you'd like. Still have some results rolling in. All right, thank you all for answering. I'll go ahead and share the results. Oh, we still have a few more coming in. Okay. All right, so it looks like our biggest need right now is around push-based discovery. Our second biggest need is around AI Ops. Third biggest need, ITSM, security operations, and software asset management. Thank you guys for answering those questions. These will certainly help us, with future product development as well. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm going to now turn this over to Severin to talk about ACC in more depth.
Thank you very much. And while I'm trying to share my screen, please everyone have a closer look at what Steve has been able to publish on the community site, on YouTube as well. So on community, on the white papers, etc. Steve, you have done an amazing job, and well, thank you for your contribution. So
thanks, Sam.
Getting started here. Of course, I have a Zoom. So this is the store. I have Zoom hiding here, so I have no clue about what is behind, but you can see all of these applications content delivered on the store for the Agent Client Collector. So let's get started here. And sorry, I have a small cough. It should be fine. It should be fine for 30 minutes. All right. So this session is about getting you all the insights you need to get started with the Agent Client Collector beyond the simple initial deployment that you had at the beginning, just trying out the agent. So today, I would like to cover a bit of a product architecture, but more importantly, share some insights, some material from my own experience assisting my customers who engage with me directly, and see if it can be helpful for you to go through your production and get the value, get the outcome of the Agent Client Collector. So I will give you some insights about who is needed, when, etc. Then we can discuss how to roll out the product. We have multiple options. There is not a single answer, but at least to give you the clues on where you should get started to get your own plan for that. And after that, that will be the first part. We can do some Q&A, but then we get into a deep dive on the agent client collector. So let's get started. Why are we here today? Well, my manager asked me to, but all right, we have an increasing, amazing adoption of the agent, and we need to communicate to our customers, not just with the docs on the portal, not just with our account teams, but we need ways like this community to reach out to you. So thank you again for joining us here today. And also, well, I was told a while back that about the format, short webinars, 20 minutes, were not technical enough. So we were asked to provide more technical content for this kind of sessions. So we still have about 45 minutes. Let's see how far we can go with that. And last, well, I want you to be successful. So getting all of the information you need to have your path to your plan for production rollout is very important. So I hope that this session will be very helpful for you to get to that stage. And for those who are already in production, you may want to revisit a few things. And if so, engage with your account team, maybe reach out to us as well if you have some specific questions. So about the initial simple deployment, maybe your proof of concept, proof of value. You deployed an agent on a couple of systems. These agents connected to your mid server that was this time hosting a small web server on HTTP or HTTPS. And that mid server will connect back to the instance. So this is the simple topology. And I actually have some customers, they tried out the agent, but they didn't have a place to run the MED without going through the request to the network team to get everything in place. So they just deployed the MED on their own laptop. And then they run the agent connecting to the MED on the same system and then went back to the instance. Easy. For some customers, it may take 5 minutes just to get that. This is great. But between that achievement to have a few agents connected to your instance and have it running at scale in production, you have quite a bit of a gap. Let's put it that way. So let's see a bit more what you can expect in your environment. You may have data center infrastructure, servers connecting maybe directly to the MEDs or through some load balancers, maybe some network ACLs, maybe the MEDs run on the DMZ. But this is the first use case, is to get access to those devices on your data center. A second situation may be in your office on your corporate network, where you may have some workstations or laptops connected to your internal corporate network. Maybe there is a firewall in between. I believe they will not access directly to your MED. Maybe the MED is actually hosted on the data center, but all right, you have a bit more to reach out to those configurations. And additionally, you may have endpoints out of your corporate network, even out of your VPN. So for the ones going to VPN, they may go back to your MED running for Office, but the other ones, you may need another mechanism to reach back to those MEDs, just like a regular website. So you can see how things can get quite complex. And this is just like a simple view of how it works in real environments. You may have a disaster recovery site. You may have a global load balancing with DNS. You may have a more complex infrastructure on the cloud with multiple providers, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, just repeating one more time, if it can save a few tickets on the customer portal. It is the agent that connects to the mid, not the other way around. And each agent will have just a single connection at a point in time to a mid. So with all of that, a regular environment, IT infrastructure environment, you can see that many components have to be put together in order to get things working in a real environment. So, of course, you have your CMDB and ServiceNow platform admins, right, to get started. But then you will need likely system administrators to deploy the agent. Even on a small scale, you will need the assistance to do that, except if you have a completely self-service environment. You will likely have, depending on the complexity of your network, a lot to do on the networking with the DNS configuration, load balancing, network ACLs, of course, and the certificates, TLS certificates, potentially. Those certificates may be handled by your sysadmins, or potentially by a dedicated team. We cannot tell you. You have to figure that out. So it may be a specific PKI team for that. Then, which user to assign the agent on your systems, on Linux, on Windows? You may not have a single answer for every use case. Depending on your infrastructure, your topology, your security guidelines, you may choose one option or another. You may find a dedicated team on Active Directory who will handle that. Others may just handle that with a request with a sysadmin team. You have to figure it out. And then, how do you distribute your package and maintain your package at scale? Again, it depends on the environment. You may have multiple teams, like a Mode 1 team for data center and a Mode 2 team for cloud deployments. They may not handle things the same way. So you will need to get those SMEs for each of these groups in order to be successful in, well, first preparing your plan, all right, having your architecture design in place, and then having their support for rolling things out into production. So stepping back for a second, you need first to identify your initial, at least, use cases with the agent. Is it about providing an alternative, let's say, to horizontal discovery, where you may find issues accessing specific parts of a network? You cannot run a mid maybe on that specific VLAN, and you cannot access it remotely. You may want more real-time information, near real-time information being collected by the agent instead of the horizontal discovery schedules. Or you may want to have a hybrid approach, potentially, where you will use deep dive discovery for including application configuration-based discovery, that surgical discovery, and get top-down service mapping, for example. So try to identify those use cases. Another one, it may be just globally, where you cannot use credentials to access those systems remotely. And because of that, you need a solution that is agent-based. So this is another use case here. Then all of that interactions we have where we can collect data on demand, execute commands like remediation playbooks, and enrich security incidents, collect software metering, well, the agents are a very good solution for that. And it may be the why you are pushing this agent there. And the last piece, this is about a feature that we released back in May, where we provide a way to collect data from completely disconnected networks. It is obviously not using the online agent running a MAID, connecting to a MAID, but still, we decomposed the agent, we took the scripts, we rebundled all of the scripts, and in those by yourself, collect the output, and then once you leave the secure facility, you can upload that data into ServiceNow manually. So, not a single plan that will fit everyone, but just think about how you will approach your work with the agent client collector. Again, you may have started with a simple proof of concept or proof of value. Some customers, they go to the POC and they release to production right after that. So they got everything covered actually just before they turn on to prod. But I recommend taking a phased approach for that, where first you will confirm that you have a simple topology and you like the data points provided by the agent, and you feel you can move forward with taking on the next step with it. So after that, you may want to pick up a couple of, how we say, representative operating systems running, deploy the agent over there on a small scale, and just to see what happens. If you are facing any challenge that may be on the networking, or that may be on the OS itself, or issues with your ServiceNow instance, potentially, to identify them on a scale that is still limited and manageable, let's say. And so this is all to certify that the data collected by the agent is the one you expect, and if not, to take some action to cover these. Once you are done with data certification, you can start the work engaging your other colleagues potentially, and prepare for that architecture review board review or security review, and have the right topology for that. You will need to understand how many MAIDs you need. Do you reuse existing MAIDs or do you spin up new ones? Where? So back to that complex network topology, think about how things will work for that. Once you're done with that plan, you need to automate it. It's an agent. You are deploying a piece of software in your core critical assets. You need to be able to handle these at scale. It is mandatory, just like any other piece of software. Nowadays, you must have that automation in piece to be successful. And last, what do you do after that? You need to make sure that the CMDB is healthy, just like the process when you ingest data from multiple data sources into that federated CMDB on ServiceNow platform. You need to make sure that the data that gets in correctly. If it doesn't, you need to take action for that. So you will need to update your operational/governance process to keep the CMDB healthy, and add that piece specifically to the agent client collector. Then, how do you deal with upgrades? Agent upgrades, upgrades on your instance, upgrades on the application, upgrades maybe on your own custom scripts you may add. And how do you deal with just agent configuration updates? Again, being able to distribute and maintain your packages at scale, and their configuration is highly, highly, highly important. So before we go to the, that was introduction. Before we take a deeper dive into the product, Steve, do we have any question maybe?
Yes, we do. So a question came out, does it work the same way as the SCCM agent and scan over the internet? So essentially, I think what you described, the architecture where you could put a mid server, behind load balancer on a public cloud, right?
Yes. So that's it. It is not, how we say, using MIDs on the cloud or somewhere where you can NAT back to a private IP. You can get your agents on systems, endpoints, end user compute endpoints that are not connected to your corporate network. Yes, so that will work over the internet. But just to make it clear, the MIDs will not scan the internet, just to make it clear. It is the agents that connect to the MIDs. So just like a regular web server, you may have some web servers, websites in your internal corporate environment, and you may have some others that are public, but they are still hosted in your data centers or on the cloud. The same applies here.
Okay. Thanks, Severin. As far as deploying the agent, I'm sure you're going to get into this, but so a question came up: can we install the agents automatically for specific hosts, right? For example, if we want to install the agent just on all my Windows notebooks, can I do this massively without using a third-party solution?
So if you know already these devices, you could potentially, let's say using the Flow Designer, if you can access them remotely. Now, is it something that will work all the time? As we just mentioned, devices that are not on the internet, it may be, that are just on the internet and not on VPN, it may be problematic.
Okay, and guys, that's done with the we have Integration Hub. Now it's called the Automation Engine, and that uses the Agent Client Collector Spoke that can help you do that. Just a couple more questions, Severin, before we move on,
Yep.
and I'll keep answering them in the background as well. So for existing customers that have deployed mid servers for cloud discovery, right, private infrastructure as well, and they have firewall ports open, right? What benefits does ACC provide here, and how to upsell it internally?
Yes, absolutely, and it works in conjunction with cloud discovery. So the agent will collect quite a significant amount of data points that are not represented with just your cloud topology. So they work together. We highly recommend you enforcing tagging on your cloud infrastructure. And with that cloud discovery, then ACC will create that relationship between the VM instance and the server that was discovered by ACC.
Great, thank you. And I think the rest of the ones we'll save because I think you're going to cover some of these next. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, that was a long introduction. We have 25 minutes. Okay. All right. So for this deep dive, let's get a bit more into that network topology, how you configure your MIDs, and then I would like to go to how you run the agent, how you connect the agent to the MIDs. And then we'll get more into the whole cycle of how data is collected and transferred and processed into the instance, into the CMDB. So we can do some troubleshooting as well that can be helpful. Last piece, I would like to have a few words also on what you need to do for automation. 25 minutes, let's go. All right, your MIDs. Your MIDs host a web server. So the MID will listen on a port. I keep repeating, hopefully we won't have any more cases on that. Your MID, if it runs as privileged user, so system account or root account, it can listen on port 443. But of course, if you have multiple maids on the system, and if you have just one, let's say, IP address assigned to your system, you cannot listen on port 443 from multiple maids. So you have to make a decision here if you run maids on dev and prod on the same systems. If you run your maid on a GMSA account, for example, it will have to run on a non-privileged port. That's what it is. So you will have to make the decision. Ask your security what is the best for your standards. Then, do you want the agents to connect to the maids, or should they go through a load balancer? Again, your infrastructure may be quite complex, and maybe your network team will prefer handling network connections using load balancers because this is what they've been doing for years and that works very well. If so, just keep doing that for this connectivity. You can also configure the maid to return actually the list of all the maids to the agents. And then the agents will identify the latency. So we'll do a TCP round robin and get the latency for each maid and connect to the maid automatically. But it still needs one maid at least to get started. So you need maybe a CNAME or something that will make sure that when you resolve your first maid, that in any point in your network, it will be able to connect to that maid. Alternatively, you can just specify that list of maids and all load balancers, just to make it clear. Of course, with a maids running on the cloud provider, for example, if you have end user compute, you will need something to put in front of your maid to get that NAT, so that from a external IP, it resolves and it forwards to the internal IP that will hit the maid. Maybe you have some some integration with Infoblox or Zscaler to manage that DNS config, and it will automatically get the right information, the right DNS resolution to the agent, whether it's on VPN or not, or whether it's on the local office or not. So think about that as well. I mentioned, how do you want your topology? You will not connect all your agents in all your systems to both dev and production instances on ServiceNow. So you will need a few test systems where you can switch the agent, right? First, you start with dev, with a maid on a dev instance. And then whenever you were good with that, you switch it back to production. So think about the life cycle you're going to have with that. Regarding the operating system, the protocol between the agent and the maid is HTTP, WebSocket. To be more specific, it's an extension of HTTP protocol. Therefore, you do not need the, a Windows with PowerShell to connect to your Windows systems. So if it is easier for you to manage maids on Linux, or more cost efficient, et cetera, you can get your Windows agents or Mac agents connecting to the maid on Linux, not a problem. Next, something that happens quite a few times. You have network ACLs where you have to allow that port, but you also have host firewalls you have a Windows Defender on the local security policies. You can just take the time. It takes a minute or two to make sure that your host firewalls are correctly set up. Now, dedicated MIDs versus multiple capabilities on the MID. It depends on what you want to do. And it may work for dev. You can use multipurpose for dev. But for prod, let me ask you this. Would it be wise to run on the same system, on the same process, the workload of a web server with many multiple connections, network connections for each browser, each network client, and run your database on the same system with your middleware in between to do some heavy processing, data processing? If you believe that the answer may be no to that question, then you may want to use dedicated MIDs so that you have that specific workload on the agents, and you can apply that mid-sizing rule of thumb. For now, Steve, we don't have NDA, I guess, so yeah, we stick to that for now. 1,000 agents per gig of Java heap size. And last thing that can be problematic for customers I've seen on that is on TLS configuration, because obviously we enable HTTPS by default, but guess what? The certificate we provide is hosted on the MID. It is not a signed certificate by your internal CA. It's a self-signed certificate. So our agents by default skip the TLS handshake verification. If you're not so sure about what I just said, please reach out to your security and how we say sysadmin teams to help you to get it right and create a TLS or digital certificate signed by their own CA and get that uploaded into your MID key store. Let's keep going. We do have a few tunables, just a few. We do have a couple of system properties. And for this topic here, enable or disable the automate selection. How many agents you want to max out? So on any server, if you have ever programmed a server of any kind, you put a value, a max value to your queue, to your TCP connection queue. This is that number that is 4,000 by default. So you may want to adjust it to your needs and to the sizing that we discussed before. We talked about the web server configuration. So then load balancers, what do you do about DNS? On load balancers, do you terminate the connection or you just forward it? That will decide your DNS config and of course, what you put in your TLS certificate. So make sure you consult again with your networking team and PKI team for that. On the MIDs, inbound HTTPS, the max heap size for your MID, default is 1 gig. So you see, you have 1 gig here, 4 gig there by default. You may want to do something about that. I mentioned the key store to get the digital certificate for TLS communication. And then your MID service, how do you want your MID to run, under which user? Because that will decide if you can use port 443 or a port that is above 1024, above or equal. On the agent, you will specify your MID URL, which can be multiple ones. That's an array. So you can put multiple ones. You can combine load balancers and other stuff, direct MIDs. It's totally fine. You will also say if you want to go through that automate selection algorithm that we provide by default. And last thing, if you do the TLS handshake verification.
Severin, just a quick question.
Yes.
That came up. So the question seems to be around, is there a maximum number of agents per mid recommended? But I think the answer is it depends how much memory the mid server has, correct?
Exactly, yes. Then it's about how many concurrent TCP connections you're going to have. By the way, if you run as a non-root, you may want to change the limit on how many file descriptors you can have open at the same time. The agents stay active. The connection will stay active. That's how we can have that bidirectional communication. So just like going to a place, let's say a pub, you want to order a drink. If there are many people at the desk to order a drink or just to catch the attention of a bartender, it may be problematic. That's the challenges with context switching on CPU. So at some point, memory may not become your limiting factor. It may just be CPU. With latency, that accounts for CPU usage. So you will have to revisit those metrics to make sure that everything is going the way you expect.
Thanks, Severin.
So now about the agent itself. If you want data, likely you need some privileges to some extent. I am not the one who designed the Linux kernel. I'm not the one who designed Windows either. And that's what it is. On Linux, you want to collect the serial number, any serial number on your system. There are not so many options. You need to get it from /dev/ram, which is available normally using the MID code. If you can convince, I don't know nowadays who maintains that kernel, Alan Cox or others, convince them to make that readable from a normal user, please proceed and let us know how it goes. But it was asked already about more than 20 years ago. Same thing on Windows. You want the whole path of your executable, and you want to be able to get the parameters of your running processes. There are so many ways. Maybe you complained before about the privileges we required for service mapping and horizontal discovery on Windows with the high privilege access. But it's what it is. You need that debug programs privilege in order to get the full description of your running processes. It's what it is. Same thing here we noticed on some old, but still very widely used Windows 2012, Windows Server 2012. To get the storage devices with WMI, you need system account for that. So think about all of these features. What do you need? And what do you want to deploy there? And I see a raised hand blinking. I don't know, Steve, if you can do something about that. There is a raised hand on the screen. So couple of approaches here. You may want to start small with just the bare minimum, like with a sudo DMID code NSS, and just take it from there. Or you want to immediately review how much data you absolutely need for your use cases. And also beyond that initial deployment, where do you want to go? It's all up to you. For some places where your systems are not part of an Active Directory domain, and you have to get people physically get into the systems, well, you may want that self-upgrade capability that we released just a couple of months ago. And for that, it has to run as a system account. So next, I see 12:45. We should have 2 hours next time, Steve. Multiple ways to authenticate. API key, which is default. It's just a key. And with San Diego, you can have about 10 active keys in parallel. HTTP basic authentication, which is user plus password. That applies only to the maid configured with that. Whereas for the API key, it applies to all the maids part of that same domain on ServiceNow instance. And last piece, if you need absolutely, especially in those zero trust networks, you need to authenticate each client uniquely with a different set of credentials. You don't have so many options. And so for that, we enabled mutual authentication using TLS, so client-side certificate. Of course, if you want to use MTLS, you need TLS to be enabled. All right, so now about payload processing. The agents receive a policy from the instance. They will download the plugins, so the mostly Ruby scripts and OS query that we store in the cache directory. We then execute the scripts. The agent will execute the scripts on the schedule, get that output, normally JSON payload, and returning back through the maid to be transferred back to the instance. For events and metrics, it's using the REST API, I believe, with the check type events and metrics. So you have a maid server script. But for visibility and most of the use cases, we'll just forward that payload to the instance, and then the ECC queue will produce, will unpack that payload and go through all of those data points and store them into the CMDB, using the IRE, of course, if it is for every CI type, obviously. So that means you have an agent that is connected, but you don't have any host associated with it. You don't have any, it says maybe data collecting, but nothing is happening. You have nothing in VCC queue. Well, it's likely that something went wrong with any of these steps here. And so for that, you should check the logs, ACC logs. If you have a payload, it's on ServiceNow instance, you can see it from the ECC queue, but still no CI. It's likely on the IRE, it was blocked. So you have to check the system logs for that. So you can quickly identify about where the problem is and then take some action for that. Then only you can open a case maybe. About tunables, I put information on the store app release notes. Here, for example, on IPv6, on how to tweak the CI name, trying to reuse the discovery tunables, sys properties. I also made, it was a decision, it was a good one, but didn't please a few of our customers. On Windows, should we use the BIOS serial number or the baseboard serial number for the CI, the host CI? And well, Discovery does both, actually. You have a tunable for that. We're going to provide some updates very soon, I hope, but you will have the flexibility to choose which serial number you put in your CI server, on top of, obviously, all the serial numbers you put in the related list. More and more tunables here, but I still recommend enable multi-source CMDB, revisit your rules in the IRE to make sure that everything is working. So let's see, common issues. Well, your agent service doesn't start or doesn't even connect to your maid. Could be that the credentials API key doesn't work. You don't need the agent to check that. Just run a curl command and you will get it. You may have invalid file ACLs, especially if you switch the agent service from system to GMSA account and back to another user account. You may have issues with your file ACLs. That's very simple. So you have to review that. If you don't have anything in the logs, likely your agent is not even able to write into those logs. Check the file ACLs. I also have that here, typos happen. If you have a typo in the config file, the agent will not start. So check the logs on the agent. Connectivity, you should have everything here you need. Curl command. But sometimes the maid themselves were already in a bad shape and they will be throwing out of memory issues. So you may want to check the logs for that. And In that case, actually, the agent was marked as up and running, but on an old mid, and the mid was dysfunctional. It was quite misleading, I would say. Then, collecting the payload. You may have some issues with your config, sudoers on DMID code and SS. Some customers, they mount /var in a distinct directory and they have a no exec flag. Some others may have a blacklist on ruby.exe that will be blocked by Carbon Black. You may want to have an allow list for that, etc., etc. So see how you can quickly identify, at least validate your assumptions, assess your assumptions, and see in which area you have a problem. Payload processing, we have so many issues on our customers having mandatory custom attributes, changed IRE rules in the network adapters, for example. They may have business rules that will change the value of a serial number by themselves, just completely custom. It happens a lot. But also some changes that were not applied when they upgrade their instance. One customer, they had like 2,000 skipped changes when they upgraded to the latest family release, 2,000. So all of these things here, CMDB, ServiceNow admin team, we have to make sure that everything works as expected on the instance. You can have a PDI instance, take that payload and reprocess it onto ServiceNow PDI or dev instance, something that is out of the box with no customization. And by just doing that, you will know if it's a problem with your instance configuration / customization, or if it is what never happens, of course, could be a defect in a product. No, never happens. So far, so good. 5 minutes left. You have a self-test on the agent for these basic checks. Check the logs, network connections, curl / web browser for the network connectivity. On the mid, you should be familiar with all of these logs. And on the instance, you have many places to look at. But you will start with the CCQ and a shortcut, agent record to get to the CCQ. But then look at the system logs and deep dive into all of these things to understand what's going on. The discovery source was introduced in Quebec patch 3. If you don't have the ACC-visibility discovery source, nothing is going to work. So if the data is not there, you may want to start with that. Next, automation. We don't own how you automate the deployment of your product in your IT infrastructure, but your IT infrastructure does. And you have multiple ways. And you can have a mixture of many things at the same time. So you have to understand, depending on which environment you are targeting, how do they distribute packages in those environments? Do they use a third-party solution like SCCM, Tanium, etc.? SSH loop, just like in Civil War commands. Do they use something that will enforce the configuration every time it executes with Puppet, Chef, Ansible, etc.? Or do they embed the agent in the base image on cloud, for example, or VM instances? So our product works with all of these automation capabilities. We make it flexible so that you can tune it to make it happen. Going quickly here. If you need to automate it, you need to think about who runs the agent. Do you already have a ServiceNow user account? Because if you do, you may want to use another one that is not providing remote access, for example. Consult with your infrastructure team, packaging team, not just for the installation, but for the whole life cycle of the agent, for the installation, the upgrade, removal, but also maintain those values in the config files, as well as a few other places. Something that happens often also, hidden files on the Windows. You may notice that you have a space here with program files. I cannot tell you how many cases we had on that. But program data is a hidden directory. So if you look at where the config files are on Windows, they are in program data, not in program files. For automation, if you want to have the same config file with the encrypted API key, keep that agent key ID, and you put that everywhere. It will not create any duplicate. So if you're using something like Puppet or Ansible, and it will look for changes, since your agent will re-encrypt the API key at startup, it will see a change all the time. So instead, just do it once, keep it encrypted with the symmetrical key, and you can deploy that at scale. Also, right now, but very soon will be changed, the MSI starts the service once the agent is installed. So if you want to embed it into a sysprep, make sure that you shut it down, and the agent now ID that is in the cache directory is deleted. That way you avoid duplicates. I was serious about that. We need another hour.
Yes, we do. Yeah, there's been a lot of questions. I've been trying to answer, most of them.
Okay.
Any answers that, and so guys, any questions that we don't get to today, we will follow up. So our plan is to publish what you saw here today to YouTube, as well as to the community channel which you registered. So I'm going to share my screen one more time here. And I just wanted to share with you a resource that you can see if you go to nowlearning.servicenow.com/nowcreate. You will be able to find resources, right, where you can download some additional functionality here as far as workshop information, as well as process guides and some best practices that you were all asking about. And of course, Now Create also has data, documents across any ServiceNow solution, not just ACC, of course. So our call to action here today, right, is check out the store, look at the ACC capabilities or applications that we have available today, and try out some of these in your sub-production instances, right? And as you are starting to see value, share that value with your stakeholders, right? Get them excited about it, right? And of course, we are here for you. So ask questions, reach out to your ServiceNow account teams, publish comments, for example, on the community article. And then as you start to see success, right, share your story with us as well. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, this is a series. So this was the first one today. Our next one is going to be on July 19th at the same time at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, where I'm going to cover how you can manage certificates and automate certificate fulfillment with a single platform being ServiceNow. And there is the URL. There is the QR code you can scan to register. Those of you who have registered already, it is actually for the series, so you don't need to register separately. But share this link with your friends. Tell them about our solutions, and we will endeavor to train you on all the latest capabilities here on our ITOM Visibility and Governance solutions. But with that said, I want to thank Severin here for presenting today. I want to thank you all for attending. I know you have plenty of things to do with your lives in work right now, and we really appreciate you being here. So with that said, I'm going to wrap up the session. Thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.